Today I am bringing you a recent reads wrap-up. I'm going to be talking about 5 or 6 books that I've read within the past month that I haven't yet spoken about on my channel. I did not get around to filming a September reading wrap-up because I looked at the list of books that I had to talk about and I was feeling quite overwhelmed. I had one of my best reader months of the year in September, and a lot of those books I've already talked about in various videos or reading vlogs, so I thought I would focus in on the 5 or 6 books that I haven't yet spoke about, especially because some of these are new releases that I have quite a lot to say about. So timestamps will be in the description just in case you would like to skip around. We're going to start with Among the Burning Flowers by Samantha Shannon. This is the latest instalment in the Roots of Chaos series. Timeline wise, it comes before The Priory of the Orange Tree. It's set around a year before this, and then it comes after A Day of Fallen Night because this was a prequel to Priory. If you're not familiar with this series, it takes place in this world that is split into the East and West, and they each have very different cultures and religions. One thing they do all agree on is that around 1,000 years ago, this evil dragon called the Nameless One erupted from this volcano and wreaked havoc across the world. He was eventually vanquished, and there is now a prophecy that says a queen from a particular family must always sit on the throne in the West. Otherwise, the Nameless One could potentially return, and so that is kind of the mythology that you need to know. What I like about this series is how it's quite political, because there is this clear divide between the East and the West. There are also themes around the impact of historical knowledge, myths and legends, and how they contribute to forming religions. I just thought the world was fascinating and I loved learning everything about it. So I did enjoy Among the Burning Flowers. This as a very brief synopsis. It focuses on this one particular kingdom, which you know from The Priory of the Orange Tree is in quite a precarious situation. So I really enjoyed Among the Burning Flowers. However, as a standalone, I'm going to call it a novella. It's not a novella, it's 300 pages. But I think the intention behind Samantha Shannon writing Among the Burning Flowers is to give people a less intimidating entryway to this series, because these books are both huge. Among the Burning Flowers is half the length of one of these, and so I understand why it was written. However, as a standalone story, I don't think it's that interesting. The ending just kind of ends. It does feature some side characters from Priory, however, I don't feel like you would have much of an emotional connection to them if you haven't read Priory. So my recommended reading order, which may be different to other people's, I would recommend starting with A Day of Fallen Night. I would then recommend going into The Priory of the Orange Tree and then Among the Burning Flowers. I read these in publication order, so I started with Priory, then A Day of Fallen Night, and then Among the Burning Flowers. However, I feel like whichever of these you start with, you're going to get kind of spoilers for the other book, and I feel like Priory of the Orange Tree has more spoilers for A Day of Fallen Night than the other way around. Also, I feel like A Day of Fallen Night is the stronger book. I think the pacing is much better and the characters are just that much more compelling. This is not a romantasy, however, there are romances throughout this series and there's a lot of LGBT rep, which I really appreciated. So yeah, I would recommend this series. I understand why it's not for everyone. I don't know whether Samantha Shannon has plans to write other books within this world, but in my opinion, Among the Burning Flowers, I think it's a cool addition to the world, but I don't think it's a good place to start personally. The next book on my list is The House of My Mother by Shari Franke, which is a memoir. I had never actually heard of Shari Franke. I'd never heard of the Franke family, but apparently they were a very popular family YouTube channel a few years ago. They had over 2 million subscribers on YouTube. Shari is the eldest daughter and her mother was abusive. So throughout this memoir, she talks about that abuse, but also how her mother eventually became involved in this cult until she was arrested in 2023 on multiple charges of child abuse. The audiobook is narrated by Shari, and that is how I consumed the story, because I always find it much more impactful if I'm actually listening to someone tell me their story with their voice. As someone who didn't didn't have any prior knowledge on the case. I think you could tell that she covered everything that she felt comfortable talking about. She very much focuses on her own experience rather than talking about what happened to her younger siblings. She actually doesn't really talk about her younger siblings at all. There's only one of her brothers, her eldest brother, that she even references by name. All of these events happened within the last few years. It's still quite recent, and I think you can tell when she's talking that it still feels very fresh and raw. She's still only, I think, 21 or 22, and that did come across within the writing. I'm assuming that she worked with a ghostwriter. I was interested in this memoir because of the family vlogging element, but also because Shari grew up Mormon and is still a member of the LDS Church. I think there were times where if she'd written this a few years further down the line, maybe she would have had some deeper reflections on what happened. But I'm glad that she was able to tell her story, and I think in spite of her age, you can tell that she's put a lot of thought into what she wanted to say, and I really appreciated hearing it. I think it was really worth reading. Next up, we have The Answer Is No by Fredrik Backman, which is a short novella by one of my favourite authors. This follows a main character called Lucas who lives a solitary life, and he is perfectly happy with that. Thank you very much. He just wants to be left alone to eat his takeaway and play video games. Unfortunately, one day there's a knock on his apartment door because the board of this building where he lives are trying to investigate who has dumped a frying pan next to the recycling room, not in the bin where it belongs. Everything kind of escalates from there, and I thought this was cute. I thought it had some thought-provoking commentary. I don't want to say everything that it covers because I feel like that's part of the enjoyment of reading a book that's so short, but it's a story about loneliness and also about the importance of communication. I gave it 4 stars. Wouldn't go out of my way to recommend it, but I got this, I think, for free through Amazon First Reads, and it was worth reading. Next on my list is Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie, which is my first ever Agatha Christie. I really enjoyed this. I think I gave it a 4 stars. I don't know why it wasn't a 5. Now that I'm sitting here talking about it, I feel like maybe it should have been a 4.5. It didn't give me that 5-star wow feeling, but I really enjoyed this considering I thought I'd been spoilt for it. I talked about this in a YouTube short, which I'll leave linked. But I think I also talked about this in my TBR for the month. I thought that I was spoilt for the ending of this book, and it turns out I wasn't. Well, I was, I just remembered it wrong. So the whole way through I was really confused, thinking, how is this gonna work out with what I think I know about this book? And yeah, that's my bad. But I ended up really enjoying this. It follows Hercule Poirot, who boards a train from Istanbul to Paris. However, the train is stopped by heavy snowfall, and that is when you find out that there's been a murder on board, and Hercule Poirot is roped in to help him because he knows, I think it's one of the owners of the train company, Monsieur Bouc. He's also on this train, so he asks Poirot to help him, and it's very dialogue heavy. After the initial setup, it's very much focused on Poirot interviewing the various suspects and witnesses and kind of talking through his thought process, and I loved it. It felt very logical and methodical. Loved the structure of this. I actually listened to the audiobook. There's a few different audiobooks, and the first one that I tried to listen to was narrated by David Suchet, and I didn't like it, so I switched to the Dan Stevens audiobook, and I think he does a great job of distinguishing the different character voices. There are quite a lot of characters, but I didn't find it difficult to follow, and yeah, I just thought it was very clever the way that it all came together in the end. Very excited to read more books by Agatha Christie. Let me know in the comments if you have any favourites. I am leaning towards picking up The Murder of Roger Ackroyd next because I have it on my Kindle, and I've heard it has one of the best twists ever. I would also be curious about reading And Then There Were None because I've read so many books that were apparently inspired by that. The next book on my list is Katabasis by R.F. Kuang. This, unfortunately, is one of my most disappointing books of the year. I gave it 2 stars. I thought about giving it a 3, but I didn't like it. So I'm giving it a 2. If you don't know, the basic synopsis for this is it follows 2 grad students who go on a journey to hell to try and bring back their professor. I actually almost DNF'd this at the 20% mark because the tone wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting something that felt quite serious and intense, and instead it felt too fun and unserious, and not what I wanted from a story where the characters are literally going to hell. I also wanted more atmosphere, and I wasn't really feeling that, but around the 25% mark it started getting a little more interesting. We were getting some backstories to do with the characters, and I quite enjoyed all of the flashbacks to the past. So you have this timeline where they're going through hell, but then you also get these insights into their relationships with their professor, but also their relationships with academia. All of the stuff to do with that and the commentary on academia I really enjoyed, but the main story of them journeying through hell was, in my opinion, quite boring. It kept going off on these random tangents, and a lot of it just wasn't that interesting to me. I liked how R.F. Kuang incorporated mythology, and things like Dante's Inferno is referenced in the book. Dante is talked about as if he was a real person who went to hell, and they're now using his account to help them in their journey. That I thought was quite cool, but I don't think the characterization is R.F. Kuang's strong point. I don't think she's very good at writing layered characters who have a lot of nuance. When she leans into an over-exaggerated character archetype, like in Yellowface, or even Rin in the Poppy War, I think you could argue falls under that. I think that works a little bit better, and it makes the characters feel a bit more memorable, but I didn't find the characters in Katabasis that interesting. I actually found them quite annoying at times. I didn't find the romance that engaging. The characters spend a lot of time having conversations with each other, and I wasn't enjoying it, unfortunately, and it's a shame because I have enjoyed every other book that I've read by R.F. Kuang, so it hasn't put me off reading some of her other books, future books I should say, but yeah, this one just wasn't for me, unfortunately. How rude of my camera battery to run out just as I only have one more book left to talk to you about, and that is Best Hex Ever by Nadia El-Fassi. This is a contemporary witchy romance, a very spicy witchy romance, which I don't think I was quite expecting. I realised as I was reading this that most of the witchy books that I've read, especially contemporary witchy books, they have had romance, and maybe they've had a little bit of a spicy scene, but they've been much more wholesome and cosy in tone, and this was very spicy. I mean, it's not the spiciest book that I've ever read, but compared to other witchy books that I've read, I think that this would most appeal to people who are looking for a spicy romance where the main character happens to be a witch. In this, we're following Dina, who owns a bakery, and one day this guy comes in, this very attractive guy, and there's this instant connection between them, but he goes away, they don't get each other's numbers. He actually works at the British Museum nearby, and he's thinking about going back to this bakery next week to get her number, but it turns out they might meet each other again sooner than they think. They may have mutual friends in common. A large part of this book revolves around a wedding, which I thought was really fun because this wedding takes place in the English countryside, and I could just picture the setting really well. What adds an extra layer to the plot is that Dina, at some point in the past, had this curse placed upon her where anyone she dates and falls in love with ends up coming to harm. So she's typically only engaged in casual relationships because she doesn't want to fall in love with someone only for something seriously bad to happen to them. This book had a lot of cheese and it was fun. I enjoyed it. However, it was very insta-lust. These two characters want to rip each other's clothes off as soon as they start talking, basically, and the book spends a lot of time inside each of their internal monologues, and they were just so horny and it was starting to feel a little bit tedious. Some of the word choices as well that the author uses during the spicy scenes, it wasn't for me. I don't think this is a bad book. I gave it 3 stars. I think some people would absolutely love it. There is a companion novel that's just come out that follows one of the main character's friends, and I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to pick that up. I'm going to look into reviews, but if the reviews say that that is even spicier than this first book, then I don't think it's going going to be for me, and that's okay. I think that there is definitely an audience for this. I think I just prefer witchy books that have more of a cozier found family vibe. I actually tried to pick up Uncharmed by Lucy Jane Wood the same day that I started this, but I realised after reading a few chapters that they're quite similar, not in terms of the tone, but Uncharmed also has a main character who's a witch who runs a bakery. I didn't want to get the two confused, so I think I will revisit that. I listened to the audiobook, or I started the audiobook, so I think I might pick that back up in the week, and hopefully that one is going to be more the vibe that I'm looking for. That does bring me to the end of this video, so thank you for watching. If you made it this far, let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, click subscribe if you would like to see more videos from me, but otherwise I will see you next time. Bye.